Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today with actually many of you. We met a year and a half ago in Jakobstad, so it is fantastic to see how this network has been evolving and which has been the outcomes of the program. And I've been asked to reflect on actually which is the power of networks in the world that we live in nowadays, obviously contextualizing the work that we do at Placemaking Europe. So that helped me to reflect about what actually we have learned as a network in the last 18 months. And actually we've been reflecting a lot on how networks can help us to fight these complexities that we are seeing nowadays, right? So happy happy to be here, as I said, and seeing what you've done, but also to show what we've done in the last 18 months. For the people that is not familiar, what would you do at Placemaking Europe? Placemaking Europe, we claim to be the main organization for placemaking at Europe, but mainly what we are is a foundation, a non-for-profit that supports practitioners that work with communities. That means activists, researchers, city officials. It's a growing network around 4,000 practitioners that are actively engaged in cities. But as I said, what has happened during the last 18 months that made me think particularly which is the role and how those networks have power to change or do things better. And for me, there was an incredible and very sad event that happened in October 2024. So after meeting, some few months later, after meeting many of you on Jakobstad, is that my city, Valencia, was terribly flooded. You probably have read that on the news, but we had very, very, very extreme stream floods that actually caused 229 fatalities. 229 people in my hometown region, in the south of the metropolitan of Valencia, died because, main reason was the lack of preparedness. So on the one hand, already the knowledge of that climate change, being able to do that, but at the same time, very, very probably outdated and old-fashioned territorial policies that couldn't react on time, even though we are a land that gets flooded almost every year. It's not that we are not used to that. But I think this did really, really, really make me think, how can we act immediately? And how can we act in the long term? How can we do now? And how can we solve, and I will get back to that, those problems that I will call almost intractable in the society of nowadays. And also for us, an organization, particularly me running it, being as an expert but reflecting on my hometown, really shaped how we've been trying to have a word in this, as I said, in this world of solving those complexities. We learned somehow during those months that placemaking can be defined, and also you'll see the connections at the end, with a combination of the three elements that has to come together, right? And that, I think, will resonate very well with the work that you do in your cities. The first one is the right to the city. We need to empower people to share their own environments. It's like everyone should have the right to shape the environment that actually shaping them. The second is an element of let's do things fast, let's do thinking in an innovative, community-led way, and then we learn and we iterate. And then there is a third component that is always there. It's about how do we shape the future together, how the future should be a collective construct, not given, right? We've been during those months as well developing all sorts of tools that are open access for you, that are available on our website. But also what we've done during the last month is consolidating this network of cities that are trying to incorporate those learnings in city planning, right? So during the last month, we've been working with these 12 cities to develop a common agenda. We have these 12 cities: Bradford, Budapest, Cork, Helsingborg, Helsinki, Reggio Emilia, Rotterdam, The Hague, Trenčín, Villanova de Famalicão, Wrocław, and Vinica. And we've gone through learnings through different milestones. I remember in Jakobstadt that I started to share the first learnings of this work, but with a group of civil servants very similar as many of you are, across departments, culture, planning, innovation, environment, risk management. We've been meeting in each of the cities every 3 months to discuss which are the essentials of how do we act in public space on placemaking, which are the challenges that we are seeing, which are the organizational bottlenecks, and so on, right? And in February of this year, the 12 cities met in Den Haag. This is a picture of some of the mayors and vice mayors. This is a picture of the mayors making like a toast, because we approved something that is called the agenda of systemic placemaking to tackle urban challenges. So those cities has been trying to institutionalize this kind of learnings, understanding that they have to understand long-term value of high-quality policy space to allow urban areas to thrive, that they have to co-create instead of participate, both internally and externally. They have to think long-term and act short-term. They have to prioritize inclusion and equity in their actions, and they have to balance the different dimensions of urban development: hardware, software, and hardware. Might sound rather obvious, but this is not the interesting thing of this journey. It is not that the mayors have decided to sign a political declaration. Is that the communities and the civil servants of each of the participating cities have been working with each other with a period of 24 months to elevate the conclusions to the higher level of power at the cities, which are the mayors, that agreed to sign this, saying, okay, we are incorporating the learnings of our colleagues, our communities. We recognize that if we want to tackle those complex challenges that cities are facing, we cannot do it alone through the boundaries of the public administration. They also understand that it's important to work across silos. The siloed way of how administrations work was not good enough. And then those mayors come together and say, okay, we acknowledge that, and we need to do the things differently. And again, might sound something very simple, but for us, we are very proud of that, because I think basically we see 12 important cities in Europe acknowledging that they cannot do everything by themselves, right? And they have to incorporate the learnings from the bottom up. So I'll show you a bit of what they say. So they basically say, to do so, we have to innovate, to involve, and to invest. We have to do things differently and better in an innovative way from within. We have to involve any agents and every citizen, no matter if they have the right to vote. That also means refugees, but also means expats. We have to involve everyone that is living in our cities, but at the same time, we have to mobilize enough resources to make it work. And we have as well to untap the willingness of communities to invest, which somehow is one of the biggest bottlenecks that we see in cities. The willingness and the intentions of almost every community to reinvest in their places that sometimes is obstacleized or it's blocked by certain policies, right? So they recognize that, and they say, okay, let's innovate. And they commit to experiment, to try and fail. They commit to build an organizational support system. They commit to adopt a place-based approach, prioritizing local wisdom, also to demonstrate impact, and promote cross-disciplinary collaboration. And that's, again, those are all of those things that are super, super easy to say, very difficult to actually achieve. But as I said, it's the first time that the cities are this is a commitment signed by each of the mayors, that this is actually translated by a local agenda of those cities. They also commit to involve. That means putting communities at the heart of policies. Also map, cartography, talk to what we call local heroes, each individuals that are actually nodes in those networks of communities that are trying to improve their places. To initiate and nurture relationships, from the inside on the outside, having a bit of a more osmotic approach, having less boundaries towards the outside, to quickly respond, and I will get back to that, to make sure that when are things happening, at least there's some step that is taken immediately, and at the same time, not all of that will help to facilitate the transition to a healthier and more sustainable environment. And also, those 12 cities commit to invest. That means that, and I agree with Felix, like you've done incredibly amazing with a low amount of resources, but at the same time, we have to make sure that actually, I mean, highways are still very expensive, right? and the question is like, if we demonstrate impact, which is the value of doing certain things at the scale? So that means that investing means including social sustainability at human scale, means to explore financial support systems, to foster collaborative programs, to tap into existing and innovative resources, and engage in short-term actions for long-term goals. We are always discussing this alignment of immediate action and the big changes that we need to tackle. And as I said, this is 12 cities. It's a formal commitment by the mayor that now we're adapting and translating to their context. Those learnings we actually brought back to Valencia, to my hometown. So in May 2025, we launched an initiative that is called Innovation for Recovery. And the idea was to leverage the power of our networks and actually connect local wisdom and local knowledge with international knowledge. So what we did, together with the mayors of the most affected municipalities in the south of the city, with the most important journal of the region, we led this initiative basically in three phases. One, that captured the priorities for recovery among every citizen. 1,500 people participate, saying we need different, we acknowledge that this is a cause of climate change, we need more brave and more innovative planning policies, we need to recover our public space. Interestingly enough, all the responses by the participants were way more progressive than I was expected. 85% of the people were saying we have to rebuild completely different in a better way. 78% of the people were saying we really have to address climate change in a different way, right? So on the one hand, we understood the priorities of the regular inhabitants. On the second hand, the second phase, we put around the table every organization that was working with communities, with recovery already. Mental health people on the one hand, the water suppliers and infrastructures, the municipalities, the economic development, on around the same table with structuring a conversation to trying to see, okay, which are our priorities, which are the gaps, how can we collaborate? And the third element, we brought together from our network participants from Wrocław that actually developed a fantastic community plan to prevent the future floods. We brought people from Asheville in the United States that had a tremendously interesting recovery plan after the floods that they suffered a few months ago out of Valencia, and many others. But the idea here as well is, okay, how do we use as a network? First, how we understand the context and how we connect to our dots on the network to propose a different way of acting. And how do we connect knowledge? And I think this is an extremely valuable learning. Actually, what is interesting as well, and more linked to the discussions of this forum, is how important and relevant cultural institutions were. So, like music venues, the little orchestras of the municipality were immediately the notes of response. People that were like used to, I mean, from collecting food for people that in need, to all kind of, like, in broad sense, community places, and so on. So we learned somehow, like, the importance of cultural nodes for both managing disasters and then, most importantly, how can make places more resilient, to the extent that we even brought those learnings to LA a few months after the fires in LA. And what we learned in LA, talking with the music center, with many cultural centers, is how also cultural institutions had to react in a way of, like this is a picture of the participants of the conference, but looks like we were very happy there, but the conversation was very very difficult, right? But we saw as well how cultural institutions were being nodes of resilience, and how, like this is this tension that we can explore in more details, but when catastrophe happens, how cultural institutions become immediately the most important places to meet and to react, and at the same time, paradoxically, when they are generally underfunded in the process of recovery, because other stuff supposed to be more important, like opening the highways and so on, right? But I'm sharing that also reflecting on the discussion of the value of networks, how like those learnings can be brought to other places and then learn immediately. And what I'm sort of concluding and learning with that, it's actually that nowadays that I understand all of things, what I really learned, and I'm really distilling from all of that, and contextualizing in the topic of this discussion, is networks, proper networks, and you have to think about the next steps, what happens after this project, help us at two different and completely different like levels of necessity, but they are equally useful. And I'm thinking about what happened in Valencia, what happened in LA, so those are catastrophes, but generally, like, we shouldn't, I mean, the things shouldn't get necessarily that problematic to need networks. But at two levels, would say that networks help us to do now. So when something happens, or like when we need change, with networks we can get quick learnings. What Jakobstad is doing that we can learn in Varde, what the hack is doing that we can do in Wrocław, like immediately to capture what can be what is done around the place, then that helps us to properly assess options and risks. Because if I take the case of Valencia, actually like public policy took a very old-fashioned engineer-led approach to react to the crisis, while many other cities in the network actually learn and were pointing out on the importance of social and cultural spaces and public spaces. So that helps us sometimes to assess options and lower risk, because sometimes we are terrified to do things that we clearly think that might be better, because we are afraid to be the only one on fail. So that is important to learn from the others immediately to actually implement a rapid response and show that change is possible. That's one thing, but at the same time what I'm learning is that networks really help us to address intractable problems. And with intractable problems, I'm talking about those in mathematics that cannot be solved with an algorithm, that they are very costly to solve because they need generosity across cultures and generations. That means local, like long-term planning around climate change, that means housing policy, right? That means security. We need to address them without, those cannot be an outcome of an exercise of optimization, because needs some part to give up, needs a more deeper and conscious election of outcomes, I'd say, and I think in that sense, networks are super powerful. So as I said, my learning in that journey is that the power of networks, also maybe the power of placemaking, is that really help us to do now, to quick learn, to respond fast, to show change, but at the same time to address those more and more intractable problems that AI will never solve. So that was my reflection.
It's me. There we go. All right. So, since we have the time, does anyone have any questions or comments that you would like to add? Yep. Go ahead. Hang on. Maybe you want to grab a mic so we can all hear you. Is that all right? Thank you.
In the past, although Valencia was flooded quite often, the local authorities somehow did not respond correctly to that. And do you think that something is changing now, thanks also to your contribution, that they are going to to act differently, because the biggest problem is usually bureaucracy, this old way of thinking, and being afraid of changing.
Yes, I mean, there are a couple of elements over here, right? So on the one hand, I think like we are seeing a trend that is the oversimplification of problems. So, and particularly certain political visions are really going through that path, right? Saying what we need is, I don't know, better dams, or engineering, or like to kill the woke like 2030 agenda, or something like that. And there are some of them that are just keeping that path, but the thing is, this is not solving the problem long term. And what I'm referring is, we really want to address the intractable problems, needs more sophistication, but also needs pressure from the civil society. And that's also what I show the case of the agenda that was signed in The Hague. That was an outcome of a very complex participatory process that trickled up somehow. So in the case of Valencia, we are in a bit of a dichotomy. So the process that we show was not supported by the regional government that was the one that made the mistakes, but many municipalities and agents on the civil society were participants. So this is influencing. So now we have it, as I said, in a dichotomy. There is part of the local government, part of the political spectrum that are saying, oh, in the 60s we solved that building more dams, and now they're saying like, this is very old-fashioned, but still, like, people is saying that. But at the same time, the other thing, this casserole is boiling, so to speak. And the outcome is the prime minister had to resign. Now there is a completely different alarm system, so something is happening. But what we know is when we are starting to identify, and I'm just consciously using this metaphor of intractable problems, with this silver bullet, with this simple solution, it will never be solved, right? So I would say we are in a bit on a crossroad. But in those cases, what I'm just advising is just I'm valuing this kind of networks that I'm having. It's just it happens, but the thing is we shouldn't wait till a disaster happens. But when you are in a policy crossroad, when you have a question, when a challenging is popping up in your place, just use that network, because that will help to show alternatives, to lower risk, so on and so forth. I'm not saying that the good outcome is for granted, but we have to have the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? I know we haven't trained you for questions today. It's all been here's a speaker, off you go. So I know it might be a little bit out of the blue right now, but we still have a few minutes. I mean, we're totally fine without questions too. We don't need to fill the time. But if you still have anything, now's your chance.
Yes, sorry, I'm also happy to have the discussion later. This is something that I never presented. When I was asked which is the value of a network, and I was just, it's very recent thought, right? But I do think that there is something there. And
absolutely, and this is something that has to do with, can we pass the microphone on, or are you coming? Oh, perfect. So maybe you can meet in the middle. Thank you so much. I love this self-organizing groups. We don't necessarily need to have someone running with the microphone.
Yes, hello, Ramon. So there's one question. I saw the mayors. This was very impressive because we know that in networks often are normally employees from cities working, but not the mayor levels, and there are different levels and there are silo systems. What do you think about that? How can these networks directly influence the policy of the cities and not just end in the cities when they come back and nobody recognizes what happened?
I absolutely agree. And honestly, this also is related to the kind of work that we do at Placemaking Europe. Because since we are a network of practitioners, we work generally with civil servants, would say at a senior level, head of department, project manager, this sort of thing. And we do it consciously, because those are the ones that are actually doing the work, and they will stay when there is a political change. And at the same time, we also work with communities that work with them, right? So this spectrum, we have it very well covered, but we consciously said, we will only come to the mayor when we have something super strong that is almost undeniably strong. So when we came to we said, but that I was consciously you normally hear about trickle down. This trickled up. It was just so strong in the bottom up that it was.
It's going to be a geyser.
Yeah,
It's at
exactly.
the thing, right?
It was a geyser. I love it. A
Right?
geyser.
Yeah,
It was
it's
just
not trickle down, it's
undeniable. So I do advise to do that as well. To say, and also that forced them to. It was almost a cure of humility for them. Imagine a mayor signing, "We are not enough. We cannot solve this problem by ourselves," which is sometimes contradictory to their political discourse, right? To find those ways. And I think like in this project, I mean, you are finding many of the ways. I think like even the wording of appeal, giving the award, those are the moments that the mayor is brought in. But I don't think that we should patronize them in a reversal way, right? We don't fall in the trap that, oh, mayors are only here to cut ribbon. So it is important to find the right balance. So I think in this case, as I said, the Heiser was strong, too strong, that was undeniable, but at the same time, they gave the opportunity to add their layer of political wisdom on top of that.
And if I may add, it's probably another way to sort of utilize networks, that if I think of Estonia, for example, we're so tiny. We had, I think, something like 1.6 million people who are potentially affected. That's literally more than there are inhabitants in the whole of Estonia. Like, we're a tiny country. So for us, like, I probably know like 5 mayors, or if I don't know them personally, I'm like 1 degree away from them. So it's going to be a different kind of conversation to reach them, as opposed to some place where it's like it's maybe more hierarchical, and also just there's so much more people that the access to maybe the sort of the political powerhouses is going to be a lot harder. So again, kind of having that sort of sense of network, that you know who has access to whom, and how we can maybe reach the sort of the different levels, whether we have that geyser quite ready yet or we're still kind of in process. But I love that. See that little co-creation here, the trickle down, that's like, but like a geyser is like when the community comes together, when the networks really realize the power, it's just gonna be like, poof. There's like, the mayors can't run away from us anymore, right? Anything else? Anything you have in mind that you would want to use Ramon's expertise for?
I want to say as well that when this happened in Valencia, I was aware of like being involved in the city for some years. So in the past, like it feels like another life, I was very involved in policy and politics. So I used to be appointed by the mayor to help him on strategy. I used to manage the urban development of the waterfront area of my city. And I got a bit like, it got too hot for me. So I not only left that position, but left the city. So I was for some years like very detached of my hometown. And then like this had to happen for me thinking like, fuck, I really have to do things there and just bring my network and connections. But at the same time, it was sort of a bath of reaffirming certain intuitions. And I do think that there is no better way to tackle those kind of problems, but at the same time to make sure that we are building preparedness and the resilience infrastructure that we need, that can never happen in isolation and can never happen with simple solutions.
Thank you so much, Ramon.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.